Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Lane Kawaoka about the shifts in his career, starting in civil engineering and construction management, leaving the corporate grind, and ultimately getting into real estate and investment strategies to generate passive income streams. Lane Kawaoka, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
I'm really excited to have the chance to talk with you and for my listeners to have a little bit more experience listening to a leader, an entrepreneur who works in the arenas that you work. So I'm going to share in just a moment your bio so people have a little bit more of a sense for what you do. And today we're going to be talking about how your journey, your career has been shaped over time, and how you work with people and seek to help, both for yourself and for others to have meaning in their work and to find success. So that's really going to be the focus for today. Lane Kawaoka currently owns 3,500 plus units across the US. He lives in Hawaii and recently quit his day job as a professional engineer with an MS in civil engineering and construction management and BS in industrial engineering. Lane partners with investors who want to build their portfolio but are too busy to mess with tenants, toilets, and termites, as he puts it, by curating opportunities where his investors have personal access to him and know that Lane has personally put his money on the line too. Lane reverse engineers the wealth building strategies that the rich use to the middle class via the top 50 investing podcast, simplypassivecashflow.com. And Lane's mission is to help hardworking professionals out of the rat race, one free strategy call at a time. So again, welcome to the podcast, and anything else that you would like to add before we really dive on into the discussion today?
Yeah, no, kind of start at the top. I like a lot of people was, kind of groomed to go to school, get a day job, and kind of follow what I call linear path. So that's what I did back in 2007. I graduated from the University of Washington with a bachelor's of industrial engineering, and I went to work for a large, I would say Fortune 500, Fortune 50 company as a construction supervisor, construction manager. And that was where, everybody has that first job that they don't like, right? But the reason why you don't like it is because you actually have to learn a lot of stuff, and it's hard, and they put you through the ringer. But that was my first job, was leading teams of union staff, working out in the fields, traveling workforce with guys 55, 60 years ages of older with 30 years of experience. So that was kind of how I was thrown into the fire my first go around.
Yeah, awesome. And you really do have a unique kind of career trajectory and transition, civil engineering, construction management, and then into real estate and your focus on trying to help others build wealth through some of your strategies. In our pre-interview preparation, you mentioned the story of how one of your team members died on the job, and how that was really one of the reasons that you ended up leaving corporate America. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that story and explaining, what impact that had on you and why that was such a jarring moment that caused you to kind of reassess everything and make a new direction in your career?
Yeah, so my first first and second year on the job, I got put on this to manage this one crew. We traveled around 5 different states throughout the whole year. We got to know each other pretty well. And even though I'm their boss, you kind of bond with these guys. These are the guys you kind of go to war with every day. It is a pretty dangerous job when you're working construction, especially out there where there's nobody else around, no cell phone signal, no nothing out in the woods. And a few years later, I had changed roles, got to be more of a project manager, got my office job, got out of the field where I, have to wake up at 5:30 every morning to drive to the job briefing site. And a company email came out. This is a 40,000 employee company. That individual who was part of my small crew had passed away because of a work um, accident. I guess what had happened, he was walking along, and then something hit this thing, and it hit him, and it was unfortunate. And the company sort of, it wasn't about the person. It was say, well, this particular rule was violated, which is like always be alert and attentive. And I'm like, what kind of BS is that, right? Somebody died, and they're trying to make it as an example for the rules of some stupid thing about being alert and attentive. And that kind of leads into my other part of my story, where I started to buy rental properties throughout this time. At the time, I only had a few of them, but I quickly saw how each rental property brought me a few $1,000s of passive income every month, and or a few $100s of passive income per property. And I wasn't there yet to replace my income, but the light was at the end of the tunnel. And this is all happening at the same time, where I realize how working in a large company, it's very dehumanizing, and you're just a number. And I saw this as my ticket outside of this world, and it kind of motivated me even more to kind of go after it.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't even imagine what that would be like, um, to wake up to that news. It would certainly be jolting, but what would be even more jolting would be, like you described, that email that you got from corporate, basically trying to wash their hands of liability. That's how I interpret what you said. That they're trying to
Right.
wash their hands of liability and push the blame of the accident onto the victim. And man, that, I mean, talk about insult to injury. You're the employees are in his team, and you're all dealing with this news of his loss, and then you have to kind of deal with that. I haven't dealt with anything like to that extreme in terms of like actual life and death, but I've seen those types of scenarios play out again and again and again in organizations. And despite whatever the best of intentions may have been from the company, the result is almost always the same. It's demoralizing. It diminishes trust. And everyone who's reading that email is simply saying, oh, I see how it is. If something bad happens, they're going to come after me. They're not going to have my back. And they're just going to find a way to scapegoat. And that doesn't create for healthy organizations. It doesn't result in healthy teams where people really truly will have their back. Instead, what it creates is an environment where everyone's trying to watch their own back and protect their own interests, and instead of really truly trying to collaborate and work together in meaningful ways. Um,
Right.
so I
Yeah,
mean,
and
it's
it depends like on who's listening, right? Like I think a lot of the younger guys, you're in the matrix, right? They're telling you, they're kind of brainwashing you that, yeah, your role is important. You're helping build this thing to help America or whatever. And then you start to realize, 5, 10 years into your career, you become jaded like everybody else. I mean, I guess for me, that was just my moment of, the inevitable of, kind of realizing that, hey, I'm just a number here, and they don't really care. And yeah, my first few years I powered through because I thought I was unique and special, doing a special thing for this special company. But no, it was, it's just part of the big machine.
Yeah, and that's really too bad. And it's such a loss to the organization, because then they lose good people like you, who then go on to do innovative things and have great success, where they could have tapped into your potential. And instead of doing that, they created an environment where you felt disillusioned. It's the age old story, and we see it replicated over and over and over again. Some of that is just kind of the natural, like maybe I'm hitting my midlife crisis, or I'm just a little disillusioned with corporate America after my idealistic stage. I mean, some of that might be a little natural, but it's also evidence of kind of a culture of dysfunction in a lot of corporations that treat people like numbers instead of people as people. And one thing that I've learned over time is that the best possible outcome for organizations is when they're people centric. That's people centric both in terms of their employees, but also in terms of their customers. And when you're authentically motivated towards bettering the people around you, great things happen. Innovation happens within the organization. People are more motivated. Customers are more loyal. People do interesting, creative, empowering things, right? When that kind of an environment is in place, and when it's not in place, bad things happen, and you have dysfunction, and people leave because they're not happy, and ultimately you have an organization that is churning through people, and which is incredibly expensive, and just all the negative outcomes that can come of it. So, you know, I think there's certainly possibility for people to have long, fulfilling, successful careers in corporate America. But you're illustrating why so often people end up leaving and going the entrepreneurial path on their own. And it doesn't need to be that way. Like, it's not an either or kind of thing. And we could find ways for people to have their entrepreneurial spirit and passions emboldened and supported within organizations if organizational leaders would allow it. And a lot of times they just don't.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my investors are high-paid professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers, accountants, and I always tell them, well, you know, you got to figure out what your highest and best use is. And you know, when we talk about entrepreneurship, it's not about really quitting your day job, right? It's about, you know, it could possibly just be buying a rental property and doing it that way. So a lot of these guys have taken the attitude of, look, I know we're not here to build dreams or, you know, make magic happen at this day job. I'm here for a paycheck. Make no mistake. But I'm going to take that paycheck and I'm going to buy rental properties, buy assets that produce income so that I can leave this job well before I'm 40 or 50 years old. So it's a means to end.
Yeah, and well, that's so interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about that, and how you go about working with your clients to help them think through their wealth management strategies and help them to think about their life goals, and mapping out what their current career looks like versus how they can do these entrepreneurial things, pursue their passion, or just create passive income. So could you tell us a little bit about your approach when you start meeting with a new client?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I do is trying to figure out, you know, the three big resources are time, money, and knowledge, right? To real estate invest, you need money. You know, if not, you got to go make money. You need money to invest. So most of my clients have good paying, um, they're high paid professionals. So they've got at least $20,000 to go buy $100,000 house. And that's really how I started. My first 5, 7 years, I just bought a single family home one after another. And that was how I got my net worth up to a certain point, got to be more of a credit investor, but then started to invest in private placements and syndications. But, you know, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, you know, it all starts with buying a rental property. And that's how you learn. And that's kind of how you get into the whole mindset of, you know, buying assets that produce more income for you. And, you know, it's not a get rich quick thing, but after about 4 or 5 years of buying a few rental properties, you start to realize, like, hey, I just created like a third paycheck for myself a year, and how I can, you know, there's a path forward that's not going to take 20, 30 years, 40 years like the normal like wealth building dogma out there. And that's really why, you kind of mentioned it earlier, right? Companies, they try and figure out a way to motivate you to find your calling or your passion so that you're empowered to do something bigger for the company. But for me, the thing that really got me motivated was I just saw like people like my parents, they had doctors, they had a doctorate and a master's degree, yet they were stuck at this day job for 30, 40 years. They're very frugal with their money, yet they just put it into, Wall Street investments like mutual funds, and which have huge fees. I mean, a lot of times a third of the returns are taken out, despite the expense ratio being 0.1. you know it's actually way more than that. And that's, when you look at buying a rental property one year and then buying another one, you could quickly realize how you can be out of the rat race in less than 10 years. So to me, it just didn't add up, right? As I started to unravel it, there's this big, and there's definitely this red pill finance out there of doing it, this way.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, different people have different kind of life goals, and for you, this made sense to pursue this kind of an approach. And maybe early on in your career, you didn't even realize this was an option. So just laying out options for people. I like how you described it early on in your introduction, that you saw things as you were really on a very linear path. You saw things as a very linear type of an approach to a career. And that's certainly the traditional model, but that's not how it needs to be. Like there's lots of different models, um, and ultimately each person. Well, I'm a big believer in people being empowered to understand their options and then making informed choices about what is the best fit given their values and their ultimate life goals, right? And for some people that would mean they're going to choose a traditional corporate job, or they're going to go into higher education, or they're going to go work for the government, or they're going to be like a traditional serial entrepreneur, or they're going to invest. There's all these different paths, and ultimately the most important thing is that people are making informed choices. They know what their options are, and then they find something that will be fulfilling for them and give them the opportunities that they're looking for, and not feel stuck in something that they just felt like they had to go into for whatever reason, and then the rest of their life they're just kind of in that thing because they feel like it's too hard to reset. You did that reset fairly early in your career, and now you're on the path that you want to be on. Some people don't realize even that maybe that reset needs to happen, and they don't realize it till they're 50. And then what? At that point you're a little bit, not necessarily locked in, but you're more locked in than you would be if you were younger. So I think people just having the opportunity to really think through these sorts of things, and then find something that will be fulfilling to you and map with your values is really, really important.
Yeah, and kind of to say it in a different way, like, I mean, I don't want to sound like all altruistic. I mean, because for my first 5 years doing this, I was out for myself, right? I needed to put my own oxygen mask on, to use that term. I just wanted to get myself out of the rat race and get financially free. I didn't care about anybody else. And that's why I think to say, oh, you need to find your passion, I don't really believe that. I think people need to get self-preservation first. They need to feel like they're good. I bought my first rental property in 2009. And then for the next 5 years, I kind of just plugged away at it. It wasn't until that, I had 3 or 4 properties until I kind of got this, the more abundance mindset where I realized I was good. I was going to be good. I wasn't financially free by any means, by 2014 and 15. But I saw the path there. I was going to be financially free very soon. And then I started to realize that, man, life's going to be pretty boring if I just sit on the beach and drink pina coladas and take Instagram pictures of my food and travel the world, like how some of these other financial independent guys are. And that was kind of where I was, I started to see the whole matrix in terms of how the financial system works, and, how misleading and how it robs people of their retirement and their money in the process. And that was kind of where the switch happened for me to more of a mission-based model. But, I think a lot of people, they just have to put on their own oxygen mask first, right? I think it's hard to go to step 3 without going to step 2. You know?
Yeah, and I think, as you're describing that, it just reminds me simply of Maslow's hierarchy. That I do think people have their physiological and safety needs. They need to have shelter. They need to feel like their basic needs are met, like they're good. And until that's the case, it's getting to this point of talking about purpose, meaning, more altruistic, virtuous, reasons for why people do what they do. You don't ever get to that, if you're just worried about how you're going to live, day in and day out. And so I think everyone, um, goes through life stages where they have to address some of those different types of stages, um, and make sure that their needs are met. So I think that's completely normal, and something that we should definitely be thinking about. Maybe before we finish up, I was also just curious. So you as a civil engineer and construction management, early in your career, you had project management responsibilities, construction supervisor responsibilities. I'm wondering how that your experience in leading in that capacity compares to how you lead, today in your current role.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes from the culture of that first company I worked for, which is a very conservative, almost militaristic company. So some of the big things were, chain of command. Respect your chain of command. Do not go 2 levels above. You only talk to your supervisor. In fact, a lot of meetings we were instructed as the junior employees, do not speak at meetings unless you are called upon by your immediate supervisor. There's no room for idealistic employees. You work for one person that leads up on the pyramid. And today that really helps me, as we manage 3,500 plus units spread over, half a dozen states. We work through our property managers. We are the asset manager, but we work through our property managers, who are essentially our $30,000 to $60,000 a year employees, who work through the regional managers, who get paid a little bit more. We have a relationship with the boots on the ground, the property managers, but we respect their chain of command. They are employees of their siloed company, and we employ as a third party that company. So just respecting that, and we're all people here too, but respecting that chain of command, and I let people, I let that company do the way they do, but I also have set out clear expectation and guidelines, and I manage those guidelines. I don't care how they get there. I'm hands off. But as soon as they start messing up, now I start to ask what is their processes and procedures and their timeline, so I can micromanage. So a lot of that came from I didn't really have that kind of background, and for a lot of people saying, well, you think you wasted that time working for those companies. You should have just done the real estate investing from the start. And as much as I joke around, yeah, that was a waste of time. As I think about it, there were a lot of lessons that came from the day job that I took in terms of leadership, and not only just their financial, the way they did their financials too, and held meetings and all type of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good just life lesson, that even when we have, experiences in the past that perhaps, we're frustrated with, like, why did I spend my time doing this? Now I'm doing this. Every experience can inform us if we're willing to learn from it, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And so even though you found a better trajectory for you, you can recognize now that you did learn a lot from that experience, and a lot of that can inform what you're doing today. I like how you focused on, to the extent you're possible, you give autonomy. You provide, those you work with to produce their outcomes. You don't really care how they do it as long as they do it, right? Outcome based, approaches to leading people, I think, is great, because you give them autonomy, you allow them to develop their own creativity, in solving problems and their own approach. And ultimately, I don't care the XYZ, how they do the process, as long as the outcome is good. And if they have an interesting way of doing it, it's different than what I do, but it still has the same outcome, then that's great. And when that doesn't happen, then you can step in, you can coach, you can mentor, you can provide feedback, you can help them learn a more effective process. But you still don't have to have such tight control all the time, which actually is harder work for you. It's easier to help develop an environment where people can be self-governing and self-leading over their own work to the extent possible, and then you as a leader can step in and help where needed. So I think those are some really great insights. It's really been great talking to you. I'm wondering if before we close, if you can just provide the listeners with a briefly share how they can get in touch with you. How can they get connected and learn more about what you're doing and reach out to you?
Yeah, so back in 2016, I started my podcast, Simple Passive Cash Flow, found on Google's and iTunes and all the Stitchers. And I just started journaling what I was doing in terms of real estate investing. In the beginning, I was buying these turnkey rentals that are all fixed up, rehabbed, and with a tenant in place. But since then, since the next 200 or so podcasts, the story has kind of changed. But I think investors like they hear the good and the bad and kind of the story on, how I've kind of evolved as an investor. And, if you're, that's what I recommend for any investor out or any employee, right? Like you may never leave the day job, but if you can put away, $5, $10, $20,000 to go buy a rental property, and then that pays you more money to go buy the next one quicker, that's the way you're out of the rat race to financial freedom. So my email is Lane at Simple Passive Cash Flow, and check out the podcasts. And if you guys take a look, listen to the first 12 podcasts, totally willing to get on the phone and just kind of seeing how I can help out.
Awesome. Well, I'm super happy with the types of stories and concepts we've discussed today, and I really would encourage listeners to reach out and to have a dialogue with you if this is something that seems to be of interest, both from the investment standpoint, but also just from a different kind of career path, life trajectory kind of standpoint, and thinking about leadership in different ways across different types of contexts, I think is also helpful. So thank you again, Lane. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I wish you and all my listeners to have a great week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.